Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show.
GDPR is the next and natural extension of, okay, so now the data is protected. What are the rights that people have with their data that you store? So what are the data rights around information that a company holds about Chris Perram, and what can I do with that? All of that data protection part and the cybersecurity was already in place. What GDPR overlays is subject rights.
The thing about the GDPR, whether we like it or not, is that it's forcing us to do the right things when it comes to sensitive data in IoT. While there's certainly a burden to bear, following its regulations on subject rights, for example, is a guidebook on the right way to handle consumer privacy. In this episode of the IoT Business Show, I speak with Chris Perram about the first steps to compliance and how to take them.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation internet. This is the IoT Inc. Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc. Business Show. This show is made possible by sales of my book, IoT Inc., published by McGraw-Hill, and the IoT Inc. Certified IoT Professional, or ICIP, online training and certification program. Become a certified IoT professional by completing the program's 3 courses: ICIP Technology, ICIP Business, and ICIP Strategy and Digital Transformation. Details of which can be found at www.iot-inc.com. That's www.iot-inc.com. With me today on the IoT is Chris Perram. Chris is founder and CEO of FileFacets. He has provided information governance solutions to the largest companies and governments for over 10 years as a consultant before pivoting his company to FileFacets in 2015. Today, GDPR is a big focus. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much.
So FileFacets, where'd that name come from?
Actually, that's a good question. Came up the other day. FileFacets is a facet of information in the information governance space, is a piece of metadata that describes the content or the context around the files that we were at the time processing. Where our history comes from is in the information governance design, so building out taxonomies and metadata models and those kinds of things, and then transitioning file holdings from shared drives and SharePoint, those kinds of things, into a more classified system and migrating it into enterprise content management solutions, and so that's kind of where we started in the information governance space. And a facet is the metadata that is tied to that object that gives it context and describes what it is.
So now in the past, so it sounds like obviously you've been working in this area of information governance for quite a while. Where is this metadata that you're talking about generally used? How is it used?
Oh, yeah, good. So there's actually 3 kinds of metadata. One is a process piece of metadata. So you tie things like dates and requirements to that metadata, and it helps you work that content through a workflow.
Okay.
Another piece of metadata is a construction piece of metadata. So it defines 2 pieces of information that using metadata cross-references each other, and together that makes a record. So a great example is an email with an attachment. Mm-hmm. So inside that object, there would be a piece of metadata that says this attachment that is sitting out here in the ether somewhere is tied to this email, the body of this email, and that metadata defines that relationship.
Okay.
And then there are the third type of piece of metadata is lifecycle management. So things like retention schedules and access controls and those kinds of metadata that defines how long you keep something or who can access it, what you can do with it when you've accessed it. Those kinds of that kind of metadata defines the life cycle of the object.
So these types of metadata, which I like it actually, it puts a nice structure around metadata, and it's very applicable to IoT.
Right.
But these three forms of metadata, where have they been used? I mean, over the last 10 years, in your experience. Pretty much everywhere in offices, but I mean, I'm trying to, I'm just trying to understand, where is this, is this come, and, what's forcing this? Because it sounds like it's very structured, so there's obviously behind it.
Well, I kind of chuckle when you ask the question because 10 years ago, when we were really diving into this space, initially, it wasn't used very often. It was, there was a lot of talk around it. There's a lot of work around developing it, but and developing the systems and the structures to put the content into. But there wasn't a lot of process work being done in the information governance space. So like 10 years ago, strong metadata usage in transactional systems, billing systems, invoicing systems, those HR systems. But in the information governance space, it was really in its infancy, and it's been this last, the journey that we've been on since really 2005 that we have seen an incredible adoption, an explosion really in the information governance space because of the cloud and the internet and the availability of software to organizations that historically couldn't afford it. So as I say, 10 years ago, we were talking about systems like FileNet, OpenText, at the time it was LiveLink, or even eDocs. Mm-hmm. And those were big mega systems that were many millions of dollars, and most organizations couldn't afford either the software or the resources required to implement it. Now we have the availability of, things like Office 365 or M-Files or NetDocs and these smaller up-and-coming web-based solutions that are, billing out at as low as $10 a month, $20 a month per user. And so virtually every organization in the world is now using cloud-based enterprise content management systems. And so it's just been an amazing thing to watch, and being buried in it like we are, sometimes you lose that. You lose focus on that, and you have to pop your head up and go, wow, that's really cool. These last few years have just been amazing for us people in the information governance space.
Now, is the term information governance, is this just a generic, or did it come from a particular industry?
Yeah, good. It's kind of the latest thinking around the value of information, right? So the history has been records management. How we got to information governance as a term really is rooted in records management. It moved from records management to document management. It moved from document management to knowledge management, and then kind of back and forth a few times for a couple of years, and then it settled on information governance because in the past it was really about controlling that object and how long you needed to keep it.
Right.
Now it's understood that because it's, especially with the internet and internet systems, keeping something. There's some talk of a value of not putting any restrictions on how long you keep things. And so then if you are going to go down that path, you need to govern that object more than just control it. And so you need to be able to, wrap really complex systems around something that in the past has not been terribly complex. And so you need, who can access something. You're putting security around something. You're putting usability around something. You're putting user experience is actually part of information governance now, because we want to ensure that people are taking advantage of the resources that are available to them. And so what falls within that category called information governance is now so broad compared to what it was when it was knowledge, document, or records management.
Okay.
So that's where it came from.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a good history lesson, actually, and I didn't realize it, because I've heard knowledge management, I've heard of, record management. So you're saying this is the evolution of it. And so, for our listeners, I know a lot of them are thinking, oh, okay, digital twin, this is the data that we store for physical objects with the models that we use for purposes. So is this access control and the different wrappers around the data, how is that implemented? Is it implemented at the database level where you're just putting in fields, or is it actually, do you require a completely different system? Where is this? And I know we're going to dive into this, but at a high level, where is this taking place? So
the answer to that is it depends. It depends on the system implemented. Right. So and it depends on your level of risk tolerance and those kinds of things. So there are good enterprise content management systems like OpenText Content Server or FileNet or even mFiles, those kinds of systems, they deploy access control within their system, and it would be at the document level. Now, there's control and then there's control, and so there are other systems like Titus Labs or that classify content and let you better control what you can do with it. So then it lays on top of an ECM and an enterprise content management system and defines whether something is allowed to be emailed or printed or accessed or copied. Those kinds of more granular controls on that object, but it still it's directed at each object and sort of managed at a database level. Okay. So we're gonna get into this a little bit later on, because that's coming off of an IoT system. For example, will be unstructured. Part of it's gonna be coming from sensors, so it's gonna be very raw. With metadata associated with it, but it's very raw. And I don't think it's practical everything through at a document level. If you're working at an access kind of document level, that's not going to cut it. But I don't want to get there now. I want to just sort of put that out there for everybody. But we'll get that when we start talking about how do we implement GDPR compliance solutions. But why don't we start, Chris, by you giving a bit of background about yourself and specifically, how you're getting involved in the Internet of Things. I've been in the information governance space my whole career. Okay. So it's over 25 years now, unfortunately. If you could see me, I got a little gray hair. But what I was specifically, my expertise was in the design and implementation of taxonomies. And so from the ends, the first design of FileFacets, it was always to be a internet-based solution to manage processes and classification of content. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of the Internet of Things, we have the root of our solution has always been there, and we are absolutely a SaaS solution today, and are available that way. And so, without diving too much into that, just to give a background of where we come from, it's also my opinion that metadata is the lifeblood of these systems, whether it's on-prem or on the internet. And so we are rooted in the foundations of what you need to succeed in an internet-based content management solution, for sure.
So now are you finding, I mean, it sounds like information governance has been more on the enterprise level. And I guess that's a pretty broad term.
That's right.
Where are you seeing traction in the Internet of Things? Is that also within the enterprise, so that's bringing IoT solutions within enterprise, or just give me a little bit of...
Yeah, so, well, the traction from our perspective is it's more around the machine learning and AI and deploying from an internet-based solution into the enterprise. But what's exciting for us is that it's no longer the capital E enterprise, as I was mentioning earlier about web-based content management solutions. It is now more about deploying into virtually every organization in the world, every small and medium-sized organizations that historically weren't able to take advantage of these solutions. Because of the democratization of software through the internet, we're able to, and companies like us are able to provide very advanced solutions using advanced technologies like machine learning and AI at frankly rates that these small organizations can afford and help them be compliant. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, managing things like PII and those kinds of objects that are coming from the internet and going to the internet, right? So it's really cool.
So now, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying is that, I mean, enterprises, big E, little e, they've been gathering data, there's been data that they can gather for eternity. I mean, but now, with the Internet of Things, there's a different source of data. It could be, directly from a product, for example, or their customers using their product. Now, this is where you're starting to see the ideas from an ECM being applied to T. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And the cool thing is that it's also an explosion of volume as well, right? So because the sources now that are available to an organization aren't limited to their own domains, they have the web at their fingertips, and every resource available to them is coming into their organization as they find it and as they need it. And so that availability of content and the availability of knowledge and information is just something that I didn't actually think I'd ever see, for sure. And it's something that is an incredible opportunity for companies like ours to assist these organizations in controlling it, understanding it, protecting themselves from it,
or from themselves, protecting themselves from themselves, right?
Exactly, that's right. And so that's the Internet of Things has just exploded what is available to these organizations, and now they're needing to address new and different challenges because of it.
Well, we've been talking on the policy side for quite a bit, and I know later we're going to talk about technology, but let's go to policy now. And I'd like to first get your take on the GDPR, or maybe let's step back a little bit further than that. And where does the comparison at a very high level, or how would you compare data privacy, information privacy regulations between the EU and Asia, just at a high level?
Yeah, good. I've actually been traveling in all of these regions for the last year, 18 months, discussing this exact topic. Mm-hmm. And what it boils down to is that they all have virtually the same guidelines. Okay. Virtually. I mean, there's some minor differences, but really what has added a new level of sophistication to the problem is the penalties involved in not meeting the obligation. And so if you were to ask me what the one thing between these three regions is that the EU has defined a very strict and pretty large penalty regime around not meeting the obligations, which is forcing other organizations other regions to address that. And so the other thing that the EU has done is not limited regionally which organizations must comply with their particular regulation, which is the General Data Protection Regulation.
What do you mean by that?
Any organization that sells to stores information about an EU citizen is obligated to comply with GDPR and falls within the penalty regime if they don't comply. Now, another interesting thing. FileFacets is Canadian. We're based in Canada, and so we have some deep understanding of the Canadian environment. And Canada recently signed an agreement with the EU for a free trade agreement. Within that free trade agreement is an obligation on Canada's part to kind of normalize our regulation, which is the acronym is PIPEDA.
In Canada.
The actual name. So PIPEDA now needs to be normalized to GDPR standards. So by January 2018, it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it has to level the playing field. And so Canada will be obligated to implement penalties that are similar to GDPR. I bring that up because I suspect that those kinds of things are going to be propagated into other regions as well. So if a free trade agreement is defined between the U.S. and the EU, those kinds of penalties will come into play as well. ASEAN has their own set of privacy rules, and again, they are being revamped as we speak based on GDPR and the obligations that are defined in GDPR, as well as the penalties that are defined there. So that EU regulation has really had a ripple effect around the world, primarily because, in my opinion, because the obligation of these foreign companies to meet GDPR makes it probably, I'll use the word easier, for those jurisdictions to implement new and better regulations around privacy.
Right. And it kind of gives them an impetus to do that, or gives them a reason to do that. So what you're saying is high level, whether it's America, the European Union or region, these are best practices, and they've been pretty much tied by governments around the world. However, the difference, and this is obviously why we're talking today, but is the EU's taking the lead on this, right? They're taking the lead on this.
Absolutely.
And they are encoding it, writing it into law, regulations. And like you said, just because if you want to sell into Europe and you want to sell your products to a EU citizen, then you being a company have to these laws. And so that is interesting, because what you're saying is that you're starting to see this effect in different countries by this pending May, right, 2018. So May 2018, a few months away. We still got, 7, 8, something like that months away. But you're starting to see that as maybe speeding up the regulatory, process in different regions in the world?
Oh, absolutely. Canada, for example, would not be having this conversation if it wasn't for GDPR.
Right.
And if it wasn't for the free trade agreement. And they're going to be implementing or presenting a new set of rules by January 2018 in advance of the May 25th deadline.
Interesting.
So, it's absolutely.
It's actually it's forcing the issue.
Yeah.
and it's interesting because you also mentioned level field, because this is something, that I talked a little bit about on this podcast and written a little bit about it in my newsletter. And that is this, I recently traveled to Europe as well. And,
yes,
and
right.
Innovation versus in Europe, it seems everybody is so focused on complying that they're putting all their energy there. And elsewhere in the world, and I'll speak specifically in North America, there's the opposite. We got to make money, and then we'll figure out this compliance stuff. Do you have any observations along those lines, or opposite from those lines that you can share?
No, I hadn't thought of it that way, but it's been kind of needling at me as well, that exact thing, because here is we are, as a company, selling into the EU primarily. I mean, we're selling around the world, but we're really focused right now on May 25th.
Sure.
And every once in a while, I think to myself, boy, there is a real cost to doing business in the EU now with this regimen, because there's tangible things that you need to buy in order to satisfy this law. And so, which we don't have in North America. And so, having said that, though, because we sell into the EU and because we actually have EU employees, FileFacets needs to be compliant with GDPR. And so, if you are not going to target EU citizens as a customer base, you won't have the same obligations and the same monthly outlay on complying with this regulation as a company in the US. But on the other hand, then, we're a global economy now, and anybody that's not thinking about selling into the EU is not thinking about growth and not thinking about being around in 10 years. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. And just like what I'm pivoting on is this concept of leveling the playing field, because the playing field is not level. And right now it's not level because you're right. There's an extra burden that you have to take on to be able to sell to the EU. But I got to tell you, Chris, this is just the beginning of the end. EU, they're leading the way. They're codifying it into regulations. And in my view anyway, and I'd like to hear your take, but in my view, it's just a matter of time. So you can maybe be shaking this a little bit or kind of ignoring it for a little while, but it just has it's so intertwined that there's no choice that everyone listening on this podcast right now, you have to figure this out. Now, is it May 18th or is it May 5th? I can't remember the actual date.
It's May 25th.
May 25th. That's it. May 5th, 2018. Whether or not you have to be all compliant on that exact date or not, I guess we can chat about that a little bit later in our conversation. But you're going to have to figure this stuff out. And what I'm interested in talking to you about specifically, as I said, we've been talking about policy on this podcast in quite a few different episodes, specific episode on GDPR. But I know the next question is, well, how do we implement this? And this is why I was kind of digging a little bit earlier in this ECM, price content management systems. I just don't see that, unless it's my ignorance, but I just don't see that as a mechanism to get there. But before we dive in, and I know we both dive in and everyone listening wants us to dive in, let's just do a level set. I'd like to get your take on what is the GDPR. Just give us your take.
So GDPR, actually, it's not a brand new concept. Well, it's not a brand new concept, period. It is just the latest in an evolution of security requirements. It happens to be centered in the EU, but as you said, this is going to happen. And as I said earlier, I'm witnessing it happening around the world, where this kind of regimen is being accelerated. But GDPR in particular is the latest layer. It's the overlay on top of what was the DPD, the Data Protection Directive in the EU. And the DPD was the security part of the continuum. If you think about the requirement as an evolution, as it has grown, the DPD was around what security controls needed to be in place, what cybersecurity you had implemented, what ISO standards, what internal processes you had in place to protect the data, right? So it was just about that. It was data protection and the security regimen around that data protection. GDPR is the next and natural extension of, okay, so now the data is protected. What are the rights that people have with their data that you store, right? So what are the data rights around information that a company holds about Chris Perram, and what can I do with that? Okay, and so really it's all of that data protection part and the cybersecurity was already in place. What GDPR overlays is subject rights, which includes breach notifications, that kind of thing, and also as I mentioned earlier, the very stringent penalties involved in not meeting your security and breach notification requirements within the regulation.
So now you
and by the way, those penalties, just to be really explicit, they're very high. They are up to 4% of sales, so 4% of revenue within an organization. If you have a major breach and you can't prove that you were attempting to do your best within the GDPR regime, you can be fined as high as 4% of your revenue or 20 million euro, whichever is higher. And if you are shown to be doing your best, quote unquote, but still have a breach that was deemed to be protectable, so they think that the authorities believe that you could have prevented that breach, it could be up to 2% of your revenue. So it's a significant problem, and the fees of not complying are making people sit up and take notice for sure.
Now, I understand, like you do, that there's a lot of wiggle room, or I shouldn't say wiggle room, but there's a lot of gray area in this,
yes,
in these penalties. You know, are you trying your best? Do you put this in? And
yes.
So is your take that there's going to be a little bit of an easing in? I guess my real question is for everyone listening today, is your advice that May 25th, this 100% sorted out, or is this something that, you should be along your way? Or what's your advice for everyone listening right now with respect to 25th, 2018?
Okay, so this is just my personal opinion.
Sure, I understand.
Please don't do what I'm about to say, and then I get in trouble. But I think my personal opinion is that there's going to be levels of discretion within the authority, and it's going to be based on a couple of things. One, the size of your company and the sort of security profile of your company. And I think personally that showing effort is going to mitigate any part of the risk that you might incur at a breach. So my recommendation is that that every organization needs to move down the path between now and May 25th. It's just not feasible that all 23 million companies in the EU and probably 200 million companies around the world that are affected by this regulation are going to be fully compliant by May 25th. But there are some tangible things that you need to do that won't cost a lot of money, that won't affect your operations in a very huge negative way, that you need to get done and start working on right now, and so that you are down the path by the time May 25th rolls along.
So what would those be? Give us a high level.
Yeah. At a high level, there are 4 things that you need to do, assuming that you are DPD compliant, and that's a pretty big assumption.
Okay.
But even if you aren't DPD compliant, there are a few things that you can do today that will help you define what you need to do, first of all, to be compliant with GDPR and to move you down the path. One of the big ones is that you need to do in order to be compliant is to define explicitly what data stores you have, where they are, what their structures are, and start to do an inventory of both your content and your information governance practices. Okay? Yep. And so going out and getting an inventory of your content and understanding PII, personally identifiable information, that you have in those collections of data is the starting point, and it can be done, and it can be done right away. That will give you an understanding of your risk, and it will help define any new processes that you need to define and implement in advance of May 20th. So that's a quick win, and you can take that and as I mentioned around defining your processes and ensuring that you can. They're calling it privacy by design within the GDPR framework, and so ensuring that there are, based on the inventory that you've taken and the risk profile that you have within your organization, you can define processes that are specific to each system or workflow to protect any PII that might be out there that maybe it's in the wrong place, or maybe it has to be in a less protected space. So therefore, you need other processes in place to protect it better, or to keep an inventory, or that kind of thing. And so that's also something that can be done in advance without incurring a lot of cost and a lot of disruption to your business.
No, those are two good suggestions. And you mentioned privacy by design, but really doing the first stage of security by design is also inventory. Where's your data being stored? And in the second part, where you were talking about in terms of risk, and that is looking at the attack vectors and trying to understand the probability of them occurring, then what would be the liability if they do occur, multiply the two of those two numbers together, and your risk factor for each one of these data or whatever, however you want to talk about it.
Well,
so that everyone should be doing anyway, and everyone should know what they have. They should at least know where there could be potential attacks, because this is also going to prioritize your security energy. Where you're going to put money in security. And then the second one you brought up makes a lot of sense too. It's planning. Okay, now that we have inventory, we know where things are. Perhaps we go to the next step and actually associate a risk for each of these different forms of data. We then look at the PII in particular, and we say, okay, for these pools of data where have PII, let's figure out what are we going to do? What's the process here? What are we going to do? What's our plan? Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's exactly it. And that plan can be as simple as, move that content somewhere super secure, and
move it,
or move it or get rid of it. Frankly, maybe you're holding risk that you don't even need because it's redundant or it's obsolete, and you can actually delete it as even outside of the normal information governance records retention process. It could be a duplicate. It could be an old disused piece of content that from an ex-client, or whatever it is. Run some what we call rot processes against that content, and just get rid of the risk altogether.
And if we put it into the terms of IoT, one of the things I recommend to my clients is expiry date on all your data. And if you haven't used it or transformed it or stripped it of the PII by then get rid of it. And that, that's kind of, it just, again, just puts a ceiling on that risk that you were talking about a little bit earlier, right?
That's it. So in the information governance space, we would, that's a retention schedule.
Right.
Is what you're talking about. Putting a date on an object that says when this date is reached, if nothing's been done to it, hasn't been accessed, hasn't been modified, get rid of it.
And correct me where I'm wrong, but back to the GDPR, everything has to do with PII, and in particular, not necessarily even just stripping out the PII directly, but all the clues that could lead to someone to get the PII. So Chris, if listeners were then to say, okay, we have this data, we get rid of the PII, we get rid of, let's see, an IP address that it came in on, potentially that could be used as a way to, the GPS your way to that PII. Are you safe with respect to the GDPR?
That's not...
Stripping out the PII.
The point of GDPR is not to delete or get rid of PII. It's to control it, and to put some of that control in the subject's hands. Okay, and so when we talk about subject rights, there is PII that is stored on everybody that is a customer or an employee. That is required for other regulations, by the way. Not
right.
I can't just delete an employee record just because it has PII in it and an employee has implemented his right to be forgotten, because there are tax laws and other regulations that obligate me to store that in a secure manner. So just deleting the content is not meeting your GDPR obligation. It's really securing it and controlling it and putting processes in place that allow the subject to request certain actions to be taken with their content. And so that is, there's actually 4 broad access right or rights within that are bestowed upon a subject in GDPR, subject being a person, whether it's a client or an employee. And those, there are subsets of this stuff, so it gets quite complicated, but at a general level, there are 4 rights. The right to access it. So if I'm a subject, I know that you need to store some of my personally identifiable information. I have the right to know what you store. And so I could simply request what is the data that you've collected on me. Okay? And an organization has a time frame within which they need to honor that request. Right to be forgotten is a really big one, because it's fairly complicated. As I said earlier, if I execute my right to be forgotten and I submit a request to a company or an ex-employer, that organization doesn't just carte blanche go find everything that says Chris Perram on it and delete it. Because there are other reasons why that company is storing that information, and there are other regulatory requirements that they need to satisfy with that information, right? So again, I talked earlier about process. One of the processes that needs to be defined is, how is an organization going to satisfy the right to be forgotten part of that? A third right is the right for data portability. If I have a dentist or an ophthalmologist, I want my record. I decide I'm moving, or I just simply want to change doctors. I have a right to that content, and I have a right to move that content from one provider to another. Again, there needs to be processes in place, but that's an important right. And finally,
or a product, right? I mean, you could be moving that data from a product to another.
Of course. And so then, finally, the right for notification. So breach notifications, there's really stringent rules around how quickly and how to notify me if there's been a breach. Basically, an organization has 48 hours. I have a right to know within 48 hours that my PII has been breached from that organization.
Okay.
So those are the 4 big rights.
So being able to access the data that company, organization has on you, having the right to be forgotten, including if that company had maybe even shared that data, PII-related data with other organizations, so being able to kind of erase that as well. Data portability with service providers and products, and the last one being, I got to be notified, and I want to be notified within 48 hours, and I don't know, maybe my inbox is going to be pretty full on this one, but those are the 4. Okay.
Yeah.
And as we were talking about earlier, you're correct to say that you can't erase all PII, but what you can do is when you were doing that inventory is you can make sure the PII is in one place, and when you transform that data, you don't necessarily keep the PII with it, right? And that's just maybe a best practice in terms of getting back to that and the risk. All right. So we've got, from a policy point of view, we've got an overview. Now, the next question on everyone's mind, how do I do this? Am I going to have to, I mean, at a low level, shiny metal angle or level, then I could put some fields in with all my data, and I could then, write custom code that would search my database, and then based on the records, it would the fields, and if that was a field, and do something there. But I'm guessing there's probably some other solutions. So can you give us, first of all, what are the different categories of solutions for our listeners? Now, again, remember, this is going to be IoT kind of data. But Chris, give us some high level. What are the high level options that our listeners have to be able to meet these GDPR requirements?
Yeah, good. Within the GDPR, it actually does obligate each organization to put both processes and tools in place to meet subject right obligations as part of the regulation. Now, that's where the categories come in, right? So yes, there needs to be tools and processes in place, period. Those tools can be Windows Explorer. They can be your Azure management tools. It can be. It doesn't have to be a third-party overlay to manage this process.
Right.
Okay. So
doing database manipulation manually is what you're saying.
Can totally be manual.
Okay.
And highly recommend that when you have a small company that is, maybe they have some EU employees. Here's a good example. They have a data center in Ireland, but they're really only selling in Texas. And so their GDPR obligations are around those employees, not EU clients.
Not their, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. So maybe they have 20 employees that they need to keep track of. Well, their GDPR obligations can be as simple as keeping track of those 20 employee files and having a system in place for ensuring that if one of those 20 leaves or actually doesn't have to leave, they can ask to a right to access subject right, and so they can simply have a process in place that says, okay, here it is, and I'm going to courier it to you or FTP it up to a secure site, something like that.
Right.
Okay, so that's basically manual with some good search tools, perhaps. On the very far end, the other scale is compliance platforms that are built not just for GDPR, but they're good for GDPR, very good for GDPR, in the sense that they are, if you are in a highly regulated industry and a very secure, the nuclear power plant, those kinds of things, those kinds of platforms are very good to manage GDPR as well as HIPAA, as well as environmental regulations and all of that, as well as very, tracking your security and breaches and those kinds of things, right? So one end it's virtually manual. On the other end, there is a extremely robust platform in the millions of dollars to implement, and it manages everything about all of your compliance issues. And then there are kind of combinations of that, other solutions sort of in the middle ground that offer GDPR-specific solutions to kind of mid-market that are not built necessarily for every industry, and there are different regulations for every industry, for environmental, transportation, or energy, but really specific to GDPR, and overlay that on top of your current systems, right? So.
And what are these class of products?
Well, I mean, we just call it the mid-market GDPR solutions, because there aren't a lot of them out there because everybody's trying to solve that, right?
So these are GDPR specific in the industry, and they are to help you meet compliance needs. All right.
Yeah. Now, where they've come from is very much like where FileFacets come from, where they were built for a specific thing, like an information governance solution or something like that, and they pivoted. They built that really cool solution that does some really cool AI or machine learning or auto classification, and pointed that toward a GDPR solution so that it automates the identification of the PII, the tracking of the PII, and the management of the subject rights. There are several on the market, and they're all, the technology is all good. Lots of how they go about doing what they do is generally really solid, and things like machine learning, those are all kind of table stake things now, and that's where automation and innovation meets the very practical requirement of satisfying this regulation. And so machine learning in this context is identifying, not worrying about just PII, but worrying about or identifying that content that likely has PII in it. So if you can run a system and teach your system and what a health record looks like, then I don't have to necessarily know who that's about, but if it is a health record, I know that I can put a higher risk profile on that object and process it in a different way than some other country.
Now, is this to identify it, or is this actually to, package it in a slightly different way in a slightly different data store?
Well, it's both, actually. So that's just it. So once you've identified it, now you can run automated processes that defined based on what it is. So you find a health record and you automate one process. You find an invoice, you automate a different process. You find something very low risk, like an invitation of some sort, then you can perhaps even run a delete process on that, because it's probably rot anyway. So all I mean is that the advanced technologies that are available today, that have come from things like information governance and from the legal profession and those kinds of things applied to a compliance system like a GDPR solution is taking those machine learning technologies and finding content that is of high risk so that you can protect it and process it, regardless of the fact that it actually has PII about a particular person.
So in the context of IoT, let's say you're deploying a product into your customer, or deploying a product into your own. That's not going to change that much. I mean, I can understand the different data that's coming in from different sources, but from a product that you're either bringing into your company or a product that you're selling, it's going to do certain things. And I think maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're going to understand the classifications. You're going to understand what to, and how to store them. But I guess what I don't understand is, or what I like a little bit more, detail on is, I'm assuming this has gone to your database, but give me a system idea of what's happening here. How are you attaching it? Where does it fit into the system?
Well, I think different products do it differently. So I'll try to keep it as generalized as possible. But the idea is that these compliance solutions sit on top of the repositories and connect into them. Okay, so that there might be a connector into Salesforce and into M-Files and into SharePoint and your shared drives and your laptops and your desktops and your email. And it goes out and indexes that content and presents that in a single view, providing the end user, maybe the data protection officer, which we haven't talked about yet, but the data protection officer, an understanding of the inventory that we talked about earlier. So where everything is, what's in it, what's in each repository, what risk is in each repository at any given time. It also will give the DPO or the data process officer, or data protection officer, the ability to run searches against that index and process the search results based on whether it's a semantic indexing or perhaps it's regular expression searches or full text searches, however that system is designed to implement the discovery of that content across your entire holding. And so regardless of which repository it's in, your obligation remains the same. And so you need to be able to satisfy that obligation, whether it's in an email system or an unstructured content like a shared drive or a laptop, or in a very structured system like SharePoint or SAP or anything like that.
Well, in the context of IoT, I mean, we're really talking about a data lake. It could be a federated data lake, but it's, we're talking straight on databases. And I think what you're saying here, the way that this works is that you provide access to these tools to your database. You're going to point, to where, obviously, in the context of IoT, would be the digital twin, and that's going to be the data structure that's associated, the different data structures associated with that physical product, the thing. And then it's going to be able to query that database. It's going to be able to perform potentially then these subject rights, right? It's going to be able to pull out the data. If someone's request, delete the data. If someone's asked to be forgotten, pull it and put it maybe in a CSV file if they want data portability. And obviously the last one being, something's happened, so it's notify. Is that kind of a conceptually a good way to think about it?
Yeah, except that I would add a level of, I want to point out that it isn't just the database content. So it's not just about stuff that's structured. You really do in this context. So this is kind of where the IoT and sort of domain enterprise specific content, the processes are the same, but I think you're pointing it at different repositories. And so so the big data lakes are where most of the processing happens just because of the volume, but it doesn't entirely satisfy the requirement. You still need to understand, protect, and present unstructured content as well as part of this, meeting your obligation.
Okay, and that's what these mid-market GDPR solutions provide then?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and this data, this unstructured data would be in a data lake as well, so it's going to be up to a database.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, as we wind down, can you maybe tell us a little bit about FileFacets solution and tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and the company?
Okay, so I think that the value proposition for FileFacets is that because we are a hybrid cloud solution, we do all this indexing and present a very robust solution or with machine learning and all of that, but in a distributed manner, so we can roll up, as I was discussing earlier about repositories across an enterprise. They can also be across regions and around the world, and rolling up and having a single view of content around the world. So that's kind of where we fit. We are one of those mid-market solutions where really cool solution around doing your inventory, helping you define your GDPR obligations, and then meeting your rights access, your rights obligations within that framework. So without making it into a big commercial, that's kind of where we fit in the marketplace, where you can certainly find more information at www.filefacets.com and download a free dashboard if you'd like to see what our dashboards look like, that kind of thing.
Excellent. Well, this has been very informative, and I think it's important to take the next step and start. I think your recommendations of the inventory and starting to identify processes that you need to. But I think this has been helpful. I know it has been for me, just to understand, okay, what are the different ways we're going to do this? And so there are solutions that are being helped around the GDPR.
Yeah.
And can you give our listeners a range in terms of costs for these mid-market solutions?
As low as kind of $1,000 a month up to several $100,000 for an on-prem solution, and then the bigger ones are in the millions for sure in the big compliance platforms.
And is this on the mid-market ones? Is this based on the amount of data you have, the number of transactions? What's the actual pivot variable for the price?
There's a couple of different approaches. Our approach is not on size of repository; it's on functionality and how many offices you have, basically. But other solutions are based on number of files or size of repository, that kind of thing. There are many. There are a lot of on-prem solutions as well that are a perpetual license model. As I said, they're in the hundreds of thousands of dollars in the mid-market range, and they're solid products. It just depends on your needs and how you want to roll that out.
Okay. And what would be the search term that we would browse to kind of find your URL? And I recommend everyone check out FileFacets. But then what would be the search term that we would put in our browser to kind of see what else is available?
Well, first I'd say if I knew that, I would I'd be a millionaire.
Okay, good point.
but search for GDPR compliance or
solutions or something
that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, good point. That's a good point. All right, Chris. Well, with that, I'd like to thank you. Very informative. Good luck, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks very much.
Okay. That was a good talk with Chris Perram. This podcast goes vertical, deep diving into different topics each week. If you prefer a more horizontal and structured approach to learning IoT business and its orbiting technologies, check out my book IoT Inc., published by McGraw-Hill, or become a certified IoT professional by completing the ICIP training and certification program. For details, just go to www.iot-inc.com. Also go to www.iot-inc.com for an analysis of this episode, links to things that were mentioned during the episode, and very importantly, the episode's PDF transcript. Just search for the name of the episode or the guest. If you're new to this podcast, subscribe. That way you'll get every week's episode delivered straight to your device. Or, if you've been listening for a while, there are 3 ways you can support the show. You can leave a rating or a review on iTunes. Just go to iot-inc.com/iTunes. It only takes 1 click to leave a rating, a little bit longer to leave a review. You can share it on social. I'm on LinkedIn, to a lesser extent on Twitter. And of course, you can support the show by buying my book, IoT Inc., or the ICIP training and certification program. It's how I pay the bills. Next week's episode is Legal by Design, being IoT lawful from the start, with Mark Radcliffe. I hope you can join me then. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair. Thank you for listening. Till next week, may your path to IoT business be a private one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc. Business Show.